Hi all, and welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk with Bren O'Brien and Tim Rowe from The Straight, brought to you by our sponsors, Inglis and Darley. Today, we chat about James Cummings leading his private training agreement with Godolphin and the possible knock-on impacts of that. We chat changes in the commentary box around Australia. We hear from Sheamus Mills about what it's like to spend $1 million on a Group 1 winner. We also hear about why Australia's three-time champion sire has had a dramatic fee reduction. We piece together the other stallion fee announcements and what they may tell us about the upcoming mares market. And finally, will BetR win out in its pursuit of PointsBet? Tim, welcome. We kick off the news of the week, which broke on Wednesday. James Cummings will no longer be the private trainer to Godolphin. We've been expecting this one for a while, Tim. It's not probably surprising from that perspective, but I guess, the details of it are quite interesting. And it's probably, to a certain extent, best of both worlds for both Godolphin and James, that this parting of the ways has will not necessarily be a full parting of the ways, will it?
So I think, as you say, I think it'll be mutually beneficial. James is highly ambitious, obviously exceptional trainer before he joined Godolphin and after, and I think he trained 48 Group 1 winners for Godolphin and 8 colts that are retired to stud that he prepared. I get the impression observing, while they've been successful the last 12 months and broadsiding and cylinder before that, that he's just hasn't had the numbers or the quality of horses on the ground, which comes down to stallion power. They've lost Exceed and Excel and Monroe in the last couple of years. That he's become a little bit frustrated, and probably both parties want to go out on their own or do things differently, and I think it'll be on the up for both of them.
Yeah, it's a fascinating one for James Cummings. I think he's 37, so he's relatively young. He's the youngest trainer in history. I did an article on this last year to get to 50 Group 1 winners. Now, obviously, he's been helped by the relationship with Godolphin along the way, but he carries arguably the most famous name in the history of Australian racing, in the Cummings name. He worked with his grandfather. He's got a lot of opportunity here, and no doubt won't have much trouble recruiting, investors and owners to back him in across time. What does it look like short term for James is probably the question. How does he go from where he is now, or where he'll be on the 31st July to the 1st of August, where he'll probably still have, some of the better Godolphin horses, but will have to, basically start making it work for himself.
Well, the interesting thing is, what does Godolphin do? The yearlings and rising 2-year-olds is probably different. But in terms of the raced horses that get dispersed out to different trainers, and we don't know, James might still end up with some of the better horses, but some other trainers, and we can speculate who that will be. But you would think they would want them in their system, not just August 1, but at the start of their preparations, they might do pre-training with Godolphin and how that through that system, and then join them. They don't want to go from a James Cummings, the way he does things, and then into a Kieran Maher, for instance. They do things slightly different feed, perhaps different things. They want to get them in and get them ready to go. So it'll be interesting to see how that structures and whether there's a bit of a wind down in that over the coming months.
Yeah, and I guess the other question too is what happens with Godolphin's training structure too, Tim, if they're going to a public training operation. Do they retain their facilities? How do they retain their staff? How does that work? There's a lot of questions for Godolphin in this as well. We covered a few of those in the article we wrote yesterday.
Obviously, Crown Lodge at Warwick Farm, hugely valuable complex. I went there last year when they showed off Golden Mile and Cylinder upon retirement. I think there's 120 boxes there. Boxes are rare as hen's teeth in Sydney. So do they lease those out to someone else? Do they have some of their horses trained there, perhaps by James Cummings? I don't know. There's so many questions, and realistically, to buy Osborne Park or Crown Lodge, there's only very few people in a position to do that and then pay for the upkeep and the horses in work, and whether that's a year long, for instance, they're logical. Whether they've got the ambition to do that is there's another question we can't answer right at the moment.
Yeah, and then that's the other question. Another possible acquirer of those properties could be someone like Racing New South Wales, who have shown a desire before to buy properties located closer to racecourses on the stated basis that they want to protect those for racing moving forward. And whether they then decide to lease them out and what that looks like, what's the future of Warwick Farm, depending on what happens to the Rose Hill stuff, there's all sorts of complicating factors around this, I suppose, too. I think from James's point of view, I guess he will have reasonable supporters. He's also got a good relationship with Guru through his wife Monica and extended family through there. So they've got horses within that, but I've no doubt he'll have others ready to back him up. Probably a little bit. He might be a little bit in the back foot early in the days, Tim, in terms of 2-year-olds for next year outside the Godolphin 2-year-olds, because he hasn't been at the yearling sales buying horses. He's going to have to either work with a few investors / owners / syndicators to, get behind him, because he hasn't been picking up horses throughout the yearling season, which, so many trainers do as part of the Australian way of doing things, isn't it?
That is going to be the interesting thing, because it does take a long time to build a stable. You'll see a trainer come not from nowhere, but all of a sudden they're having success, and you'll trace it back to the yearling sales or acquiring horses 2, 3, 4 years previously. So it's, he's missing. Ideally, I think he would have preferred to have made this announcement maybe in, November last year and got some momentum and be at the Magic Millions and get some support. Maybe I imagine some breeders will still do that. Have probably got some horses that they didn't sell or they've chosen to retain to race, fillies and that, for instance. I'm sure he'll get some of those. I remember there was one day at Sky Racing, one of those Racing New South Wales announcements that they show on Sky, and James Cummings was one of the speakers, and I happened to speak to John Massara afterwards about something else. He goes, how impressive was James Cummings? And I think this was around the time before he joined Godolphin. It was around that time. How impressive is James Cummings? He's going to go a long way. So I think people like John that respect James's intellect and intelligence and obviously his ability to train a horse will get behind him.
Yeah, and I think it's for him it may be the case that it's probably not the ideal handover in terms of building it up for 2-year-old seasons or whatever else, but he's going to have every chance going forward and every opportunity to really really make the mark that we probably expected he would always make. And I was just thinking about this before, reflecting before those trainers who have left Godolphin before, and we're talking about Peter Snowden, and we're talking about John O'Shea, over the last 10, 15 years, have all gone on to be highly successful group running trainers. So, the challenge will be, I think, James's perspective is just what does it look like in terms of scale? Because it's a different market these days than probably Snowden went into, to a certain extent, what O'Shea went into, because you've got Chris Waller, Kira Ma, and now Annabelle and Rob, Archibald, as they're now known, work at scale. Getting those numbers through. How does that work for James? Because if he's going to be successful, he's probably going to have to go down that model. And then who does he get to work with him? Like if you talk to the emerging trainers that have come through, people like Bjorn Baker, the key for him, and he says it all the time, had been his staff, had been that he's not only has he improved as a trainer over the 10, 15 years he's been a trainer, but his staff have come along and they've improved in terms of placement of horses, selection of horses. He's obviously worked closely with Jim Clark from a bloodstock perspective. Who does James work with from a bloodstock perspective? It just seems to me you have to have a really good bloodstock person in Australia alongside of you to do well. So it'd be interesting to see how that works for James. You've spoken about a couple of people that already work at Godolphin who may opt to go out with James along the way, Tim. I think that's a probability at this stage that we'll see James sort of take a couple of people with him, but he's got to need some handy people alongside him as well. He can't do it by himself.
Thing is, and I'm certainly you'll be absolutely able to do this, but since that last time he was a public trainer, just the level of communication required for owners has changed, and he hasn't had to do that with Sheikh Mohammed behind him. If he's training for syndicators, who I imagine will want to get behind him because he will be popular, that level of service that he will, I guess, add to his day, which will need good staff around him to allow him that extra time to provide communications, race updates. Do we tell them, the owners want to know, should we be having an each way bet? All that sort of stuff that syndicates and the 10 and 20% owners want to know.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think what will be interesting too is that James, when he was an independent trainer before, when he was with Bart and then after Bart passed away, was quite outspoken about a lot of things in racing. He was quite, he's quite open and honest about things. Obviously, working Godolphin doesn't allow you to do that. It'd be interesting to see what happens now. Does he go back into that mode again? Does he want to be able to be that person? Because he is seen as let's face it, he's 37. When you compare the fact that Kieran's probably 42, Waller's in his early 50s, I think, or just turned 50. He's got an opportunity to be the next generation trainer. And to be perfectly honest, with 50-odd Group 1 winners behind his back, he could be nipping at Chris Waller's records for Group 1 winners in the next 15 years if he sets this up right. And let's also not forget, from a pedigree perspective, it's Bart was still training Group 1 winners in his 80s. This Cummings family have got longevity in this game. Obviously, he's spoken about perhaps going back to Leilani Lodge, where he ends up, all those types of things. So, Tim, there's a whole bunch of things that have got to play out with this one. Really fascinating story. I think one of the biggest stories of the racing year. Not the fact that it broke and we go, wow, that was a shock. I think we all knew it was coming. But what happens now? What happens to Godolphin and what happens to James Cummings? I think, as I said before, my feeling that it's probably, at this stage of their development, it's probably win-win for both of them. But, a really fascinating one. What I want to move on to Tim, is we saw yesterday a story come out. We followed this story up off the back of some announcements coming out of South Australia that there were changes in the commentary box. Brett Davis, the number one commentator there, has left. A couple of other commentators have left as well. We've seen Josh Fleming in Brisbane leave as well, and David Fowler is going to be the commentator there. Tim Edwards is going to be chief commentator to South Australia. My home state of Tasmania, Cole McNiff, very much beloved Cole McNiff, will be leaving, replaced by younger people. Look, I think, there's a couple of things that around this. We talk about personalities and whether people are suited and liked and loved and all that type of stuff. But the reaction to it, to me, Tim, speaks to the importance of commentators and the way that people do things, the way people relate to the sport, and the way they hear the sport. Commentators are still the number one narrators of our sport, in my opinion. And you have to be really careful when you're mixing and matching them. And we'll get into remote commentary in a minute. But if you go to a path where they don't become a central part of a racecourse experience.
Well, those iconic races, Lonhro's 2004 Australian Cup, Winx's Cox Plates, Makybe Diva, Melbourne Cup, all those, you remember them. Yes, you've watched them, but also the race caller. So, and that's not to denigrate there will be still race callers and exceptional race callers. It's a hard task. I certainly couldn't do it well. But we don't want to get to a point where, it's like the bags or the greyhounds in the UK. If you've walked into a high street shop over there, as I have, it's so dull and lacks atmosphere with calling the dogs 1 from 2 and 3 leads 4. And, it's like playing the poker machines. That's what it feels like. And the sport of racing, all 3 codes, needs to separate themselves from that sort of side of gambling, or sort of gambling, as much as possible, that it is an intellectual challenge, gambling on horses, and rather than, just playing the poker machines and slot machines and, roulette. That's what needs to be different. And callers are a big part of that, I believe.
Yeah, and I think Australian callers have been, and I would challenge anyone to debate this. Australian callers have been the best callers in the world. They've gone around the world and they've commentated around the world. They're known for being colourful, interesting. We can all have our opinions about certain callers and their ability to do their job well and identify whatever else. But the calling of Australian horse racing is iconic and is a key part of what we do and how the industry projects itself. So I'm not saying you don't freshen up your numbers and you don't get the right people on the right spot. I'm not making judgments about the decisions that were made. Certainly some of the people that have been promoted into positions deserve opportunity. So I don't think you should have the same voices forever. And I certainly think that some states in particular, they've been stuck in the same mode for too long in terms of commentators. My concern is that you move to a mode, as you spoke before, and it's more not necessarily that it's at a racing level necessarily, but what happens at the greyhound level or the trots level, where they sit there and go, we're just going to do it remotely. We'll just do it from a studio. And it loses its bit of its charm. And you lose people from the sport that are actually good commentators and good developing commentators. And if it's been a considerable time of their life developing that skill set. So my concern is that you end up with a remote experience that has no, sense of theatre. We've been so fortunate in this country to have so many good commentators. I think they're highly scrutinised and unfairly scrutinised on occasion. I certainly think there's been a couple of instances in the last 10 to 15 years where commentators have been ushered into retirement ahead of time. I don't like. I think about this from a perspective of something that was told me from the radio industry, Tim, that it takes you 7 years. If you change a radio programmer, it takes them 7 years to develop trust with the audience. That's a long time. And I think it's not that different with commentators in racing. I think you need to be able to hear that voice, know what that voice is, and they become the trusted voice that you trust forever. And these are iconic people in racing across history. I think we have to be very careful when we're making these changes that they're the right changes. I'm not saying in this instances that they're not all the right changes. And I would fear in a situation where you end up with remote race calling as a creep into the industry, because what that means is if it happens in greyhounds and happens in harness, we're going to see that happen in years to come in the racing industry. And as you said, it becomes that one's leading 2 and 3. That's not a path we want to go down.
Well, we've seen Tabcorp released a video, I think it was earlier this week or late last week. They've got brand new studios in Brisbane, and it looks fantastic, where they are basically setting it up to call races all on up and down Queensland from Cairns from the studio, which, arguably there may be more qualified, skilled full-time callers, and it's probably cheaper because a lot of vast travel in Queensland, but you also lose that local knowledge of let's use a Tony Woe, who calls it Townsville, for instance, who's got that local knowledge. Oh, the favourite's missed the start, it's normally leading, where a caller that's calling the dogs and then all of a sudden going to Townsville Gallops isn't going to have that intimate knowledge of the form, which is part of the broadcaster's role, I guess, is providing that information and report of what's happening in the race particularly for those that can't see it.
Yeah, it's a really strong reaction to this story, Tim. And I think our personal reaction is probably speaking to that as well. So I think, as I said, change is always going to be made within business. We get that. But the question is more the broader long-term trend, isn't it? Around about being in a situation where those key people within the sport that tell the story, their role is being fundamentally changed. We'll move on now to our feature interview of the podcast this week. Matters on the track. It was a marquee day for Sheamus Mills and his team with Charmstone, a filly they paid a significant amount of money for, winning the Robert Sangster on the weekend, Tim. And you had a chance to have a chat with Sheamus about buying expensive horses, but also this horse herself, but also the importance of I guess sticking with a long-term plan when it comes to sourcing these type of fillies.
Cool. I've got to know Sheamus reasonably well over the last, let's say 9 to 10 years. He's sticks to his structures and beliefs and in what styles of horses he buys. You can look at it and go, gee, that's a lot of money he and his partners have invested over the years, but he's just this, as we'll hear from in a second, he believes this model is the way to go. And he certainly had 3 Group 1 winning fillies and mares in the last 4 or 5 years, and Charmstone was the latest one. She was already very valuable as a 2-year-old stakes winner. But to go on and win the Group 1, just justifies what they're doing. And it's not for you and I to be playing at that level, but it does sort of make commercial sense if you can play the long game over 5, 10, 15, 20 years, that you will get your money back.
Yeah, and I reported this week that she's the first $1 million filly, yearling filly in Australia to win a Group 1 in 7 years. So it has been a while. However, as our stats indicate during the week, you're 5 times more likely to buy a Group 1 winner in the last 15 years in that $1 million bracket than you are below that $1 million overall. So, I mean, I think, there's obviously you're paying at least 5 times as much, so that you get where that stands. But, the opportunity of that. Anyway, you had a good chat with Sheamus. Just the audio quality's it's fine. It's a little bit. Sheamus was driving, so it wasn't ideal. But you should be able to listen through and hear what Sheamus has to say.
If you're going to pay that sort of money for them, then they've sort of got to have more to them than just be good looking. A general feel is a good looking horse with the lack of a bit of pedigree is a 500,000 or 600,000 purchase. And if we're going to hit $1 million, there is a conversation there about it being having all the other elements that we want to see. It can cost you. We were underbidder on Autumn Glow. And the reason why we pulled up on her was it was getting to the same figure that we paid for Humming, who was I Am Invincible, Hips Don't Lie. And the conversation on the phone went along the lines of, surely we can't pay the same amount of money for this pedigree as we did for Vinny Hips Don't Lie, you know. So in the end, it ended up costing us buying a superstar, probably. Or John Rosario might have kept going, but I guess what I'm trying to point out is that it's not just is in that climb at all costs scenario. It is a genuine conversation about the depth of pedigree, depth of family, the individual in front of you, and what realistically you are going to be selling foals out of her for.
Well, you know, I've got Odium's open at the moment. You know, you sent it to I Am Invincible the first 2 years. Did you get him? An extreme choice. Is she in foal, first of all? So that's a big result. And then you've got 2 I Am Invincible colts. So what is that'd be unborn?
To make a bit of sense, you know what I mean? It starts to make a little bit of sense. Now, it's obviously not that easy, you know. As in, they're still got to produce types, and they're still got to run. We sold the first one at 700 to Chris Waller. You know, you're still you know, got an option, second colt. I'd say if you can get a extreme choice on the ground, happy days. If it's a good sort, I guess if it's not, that's going. But yeah, I mean, obviously it's a long range game, and it's you've got to have the pockets to do it. But I mean, as a general comment, I would say there's been less volatility at the top end of the market than there has been through the rest of it. So the sort of game plan of, buying quality and trying to breed quality, we're still in the infancy to a large extent with these horses. So we've still got a lot of nice horses to retire and go to study in their due course. But that was the game plan. And as I said before, it's not just the folly of a wealthy person. There is what we believe is genuine business plan behind doing this, you know.
Yeah, and that's not to denigrate the statistics, and the stats don't lie, so to speak. But if you take in $1 million, we're talking expensive horses. If you take one in isolation, most people wouldn't buy just $1 million horse. As in your case, you've invested a lot across all price points trying to find nice fillies for 5, 10, 15-year plans.
Yeah, that's the aim, you know. Like I said, that it has been. I mean, Odium was $420, I want to say, you know. Different price bracket. Vibrant Sun was $260, I want to say. You know, like we do genuinely rate them on their pedigree and have say type and where the stallion's at in its career, etc. And you know, it's not just a case of buy them at all costs. So when we hit $1 million, we, right or wrong, we feel like we are buying the horse that justifies that price. You know, trying to think of examples like Britain's Tycoon out of Karate Queen, who got named as Queen of the Green, or that Vinny Hips Don't Lie. And I mean, you know, we think we're buying a depth of pedigree and a physical type that will enable us to. I can't, and I understand it's not you know, it's not just as easy as this, but we feel like we're buying them at the level that we feel comfortable. You know, give our breeding from them in time and looking to get our money back.
On now to our daily stat of the week. Here's a quick look at Animo. His first 2 books reflect his champion status. In those first 2 seasons, he covered 19 Group 1 winners, 82 Group winners, 127 stakes winners, and 186 black type performers. But it doesn't stop there. He's also covered the dams of 18 Group 1 winners, 42 Group winners, and 57 stakes winners. And to top it off, Godolphin has sent in 40 of their best mares. Safe to say, Animo is the easy choice this season. Tim, the stallion fees continue to be announced. The most significant this week was I Am Invincible, who had a reasonable pay cut, I suppose, or service fee cut from 250 grand plus GST to 200 grand plus GST. 3-time champion winning sire, so is a significantly high profile horse, a commercial juggernaut for Yarraman Park over the last few years. He's broken, all global records in Australia when it comes to what his progeny has sold for. Did this surprise you?
It did a little bit because, if you're on it, most people, business-minded people would go, well, we're going to make X amount. We'll just keep why we're reducing because we're still going to make plenty of money out of him. And what's interesting about I'm Invincible is this ownership structure is different to a lot of other stallions where, as we saw, Zoustar share 1/60th share sold for 1.1 million on Wednesday, where there's effectively only two parties involved, which is Yarraman Park and Brett and Ray Gall own 100% of the horse outside a handful of breeding right owners who don't just get to breed to the horse or sell the nomination, but they don't get dividends, so to speak. So it has just been a massive cash cow for the Mitchells and the Galls. So they could keep doing that, but they want to look after their clients. He is getting older, select the mares that they to go to him. Because realistically, even at his service fee now, you need a good mare to justify going to him. But he's, as I said, saw on the weekend, he had Charmstone, he had Vinrock win the Group 1 size in Sydney. But as a family-owned farm, I guess they can do that as opposed to some of the more commercial, not publicly listed, but farms that are far more commercial, so to speak, might be the right term, but you get what I mean.
Yeah, and you spoke to Harry. Harry Mitchell's always a great chat, Tim, isn't he? Like, he's always a very upfront and honest. The Mitchells are a fascinating family in themselves, but Harry in particular is refreshingly upfront about things. You had a good chat with Harry about that decision.
Can you talk us through the reasons why you've brought his fee down?
Oh, look, we just brought his fee down, although he's been champion in the last 3 years. We thought, as he's getting older, we can pick and choose the mares a bit. And we just thought it was the right thing to do. We think the market's, got a bit harder, although the top's held up very well. We just, I don't know, we just thought it was time, It's like Setzel came back when he was about Vinny's age and that sort of thing. So we just thought probably the right thing to do and try and look after people who've supported him for a long period of time. We're not on a deal on him where that's going to be his fee. No other reason really. He's running third or fourth in the size table at the moment. I mean, he's having a good season. He's having, he's second to Setzel, I think, on number of stakes wins.
And of course, Harry. And of course, he had his Group 1 winner on Saturday as well in Charmstone, who was expensive yearling and a great result for Sheamus Mills and his owners and his clients and so forth to get a big result with a mare like her. 100%.
Look, he's had a good run over the carnival. I mean, he won the size. Vinrock, he won the Arrowfield within Rich, and he won the thanks to we can't stay. Look, I don't have to tell you, he's an elite stallion. He throws the best types of all the stallion, and he's doing incredibly well. But we're aware that he's 20 years of age now, and we want to sort of handpick our bears a bit. So therefore, with the reduced fee, we can handpick them because we're going to get plenty of people ring us up, I would have thought.
Is it unfair that he had this? The perception was that he was a sire of fillies, but as you say, Vinrock and obviously Home Affairs and even Brazen Bow way back first crop, but that he can get a good colt.
He's had a lot of good colts. He's got a lot of sons that stud. Even the ones that went to stud at a lower fee, like I Am Immortal, are starting to do very well. Some quite a low base. Somebody Helvet's very popular and going very well. And Fairs has been very, very popular for Kilmore. They've done very well out of him. I'd be surprised if he doesn't come out of the blocks, pretty hot. So, look, there has been a perception of fillies, but I think a lot of these elite stallions is the same. I think I remember it being with Reduce, but then he got some great colts, didn't he? And then there was a thing, the fillies are better. I think sometimes a few of the colts possibly need gelding. But, it's been a good year for Vinny with his colts, his males anyway. But, Vinrock's obviously been his flag bear 2-year-old. I think he's had more 2-year-old stakes winners than any other stallion this year, so he's certainly done all right on that front, although I think they get better as they get older.
Yeah, an interesting interview with their team, Harry Mitchell, mirroring the words we heard from other big studs during the past couple of months about I guess coming back to meet the market to a certain extent, some of those Newgate in particular, we're talking about looking after the breeders, making sure that the breeders who want to breed to these horses are getting an opportunity to do so. Obviously handpicked mares, it doesn't, I guess what we're seeing overall from these stallion fees is, there is a desire to come back and realize that, the young stallions are hot. And so, they're probably the ones that are probably at the top end of what there should be from a price bracket. But the proven stallions are probably proving more value. If you look at the fact that you're paying, like with all due respect to Too Darn Hot, you're paying less to send a mare to Vinny than you are to send a horse to Too Darn Hot. And Vinny's got, 17 Group 1 winners. Too Darn Hot may be a generational stallion, but he's only got two crops on the racetrack in Australia. So it's just interesting. And I'm not saying that one's overpriced and one's not, but there seems to be a bit of a inflection going on in the market, and that the enthusiasm for these young stallions is driving great market demand. And the older stallions, even though they've got, the runs on the board, it's probably, that they probably need to come back a little bit to meet that market.
It is a supply and demand thing as well. Even as good as the proven stallions are, if you're an owner or a trainer that's stumped up and paid a lot of money for a yearling by those horses and they haven't quite hit the mark, you're perhaps going to be gun shy, or your clients, at least your clients might be. So that's where those younger stallions come into play, is because I guess people haven't had a bad experience with them yet necessarily, even though, you can argue that they're overpriced or people pay too much for unproven, or horses by unproven yet stallions. But, I think, as touching on the mares sale next week, the top of the market's still very strong. As we saw at Easter, there's a lot of international money and interest. So, those valuable mares that seem to on sell, yes, again, people will question, you've paid $2 million for a mare or $1 million. Some do get out in one foal, but that's not the business model. I think it's to get out in 3 and 4 and become foundation mares for certain farms or things like that. So it is a long-term play. You can't base it on one purchase or one yearling in a financial sense.
Or 1 year. And what is interesting is probably there is the market's quite good at creating a sense of urgency. You've got Too Darn Hot, who's coming back this year, and or was he coming back? Wasn't coming back. Same with Witten Bassett. There's a sense of these sort of important sires that you sort of need to get access to from an Australian point of view. Well, you better buy a mare this year. Does that create more urgency in the mares market? Do you feel, Tim, to people to go, okay, we've got to go out and get a mare and send one to that, or does it not play into that? I mean, what do we expect? You mentioned before that we probably see the market to be probably similar, not too dissimilar to what the yearling market is in terms of being slightly polarized and okay, but not not bustling, I suppose, or on fire, like in terms of where it sits.
Well,
do we expect that next week? What do we think?
Oh yeah, I think so. And the in-foal mares are going to be interesting. In-foal, there's 59 mares covered by Too Darn Hot to Southern Hemisphere time last year. Some of those breeders would have done it with the very intention of selling them in foal or to cash in on that, the popularity of Too Darn Hot. Now that he's coming back, perhaps that lessens the urgency of breeders to go, I need a mare in foal to Too Darn Hot. But given there will be only, there was only 59 mares, that again, supply and scarcity of supply will have an impact on the market. And some of those stones will be hard to get into. Yes, you got to pay a lot of money for the service fee, but also just for the sheer weight of numbers going, no, your mare's not up to scratch. And we'll touch on it now. I guess Super Seth in New Zealand, Waikato stud is heading that way as well. Waikato are getting right behind him. Limited number of outside coverings available. Your mare, you have to put forward your mare. So this is why he suits, and Waikato will make that call whether they accept the mare. So again, supply and demand sort of scenario there.
Yeah, and also there's also that concept of fact whether the strength, the tail end strength of the yearling market in terms of the particularly Easter sale was lot stronger than we expected, Tim. Whether that then affects demand of the weaning sales, and whether we've got the weaning sales kicking off this week or next week, and in Sydney, whether that then creates greater demand from end user point of view, whether they're sitting there going, okay, we can access that, and also from a pin hooking point of view, knowing actually the yearling market's relatively strong. So if I pick up a horse here, I might be able to turn it around next year for a tidy profit.
For sure, you've still got to use a cliche, tick a lot of the boxes. Vetting and to to get into a sale is not as easy as everyone thinks. And then if you so again, those weanlings that aren't up to scratch or on pedigree or veterinary or on type will, we saw it with the HWA sale, which is a lower end sale, and Inglis will admit that it was tough going for those horses that didn't meet the criteria, and there'll be the same at the weanling sales. And breeders, there's some breeders will put the nice weanlings in the weanling sales for cash flow purposes to get a big result, and others it's like, well, I need to reduce stock. This weanling may be a lesser sale sort of quality horse. I want someone else to take that risk, and good luck to them. Hopefully they make money out of it.
Weanlings by 107 different stallions, including Two Darn Hot, Wooden Bassett, Old Kirk, Farnan and Animo, headline the English Australian weanling sale. Don't miss the record catalogue of 574 lots of Riverside on May 5th and 6th. Catalogue available now at inglis.com.au. Finally, team this week in wagering, a story about BetR's continued pursuit of PointsBet. BetR took a 19.9% stake in PointsBet on Monday. On Tuesday, they announced their, financing and their how they're going to fund this significant $360 million acquisition. Basically, they've said that they've allayed all the fears that the PointsBet board might have had. And I guess what they're trying to do is they're trying to leverage the situation, because PointsBet have said that they're committed to this deal with Japanese owned Mixi, $1.06 a share, and BetR are saying that theirs is worth substantially more, up to $1.26 or $1.30 a share or whatever. It's an issue. I guess that's what the point is. I guess there's two things at play here. We've been talking about this deal for a couple of months now. The first thing is obviously we're seeing consolidation in the market at that middle end. And what does that fourth player mean to the Australian market? And I think that's probably the key part is if this deal was to go ahead between BetR and PointsBet, it had created plus 10% market share. That would put them in the realm of a fourth big player in the Australian market above 10%. That would be significant, because every time a fourth player has emerged above 10% have been acquired. Now, we know Matt Tripp's game plan. We've seen this before. We saw it with Sportsbet Mark 1. We saw it with Crown Bet and the other ones, Bet Easy, that he's had across the journey. That the plan is to be acquired. The challenge will be in that Australian market who acquires them, because Sportsbet are at 46% market share and they can't really buy anymore because the ACCC will be all over them. And then we've got Tab and Entain, who are both in that sort of 20-25% digital share market. What happens with them? Both of those are in probably a state of flux. We're seeing Entain with some interesting challenges at the moment around regulatory stuff with what's going on Austrac, and Tab, obviously, we spoke about the commentary stuff before. I don't think we alluded to the fact that those commentary decisions were made by Tabcorp. So I think it's, Tabcorp is still making structural changes to the cost of their business. Really interesting one from my perspective, what happens with this deal. If it gets over the line, it looks like BetR are really putting the pressure on, and whether Mixi, Mixi's deal is there. And so PointsBet have got to work out where they are. We haven't seen a response to the PointsBet board yet, but I think it's a fascinating one from that point of view. And I guess, Tim, quickly from you, from a customer benefit, is there a significant customer benefit, you think, of having another major player in the Australian market?
From a punter's perspective, I'm not sure there is, to be honest, unless that scale gives them opportunity to provide pricing benefits in terms of better odds for punters, even if it is marginally 1% and 2% makes, is a big difference. Whether that doesn't seem to be the Matt Tripp model, though. He's proven highly successfully this is the model that works. And so does he go out? Is there room for a player to be offering better odds than the opposition, the big players? In the current market with the taxes and so forth, I can't see it happening. Just from a punter perspective, there's not a lot of benefit there, but commercially, certainly, in shareholders, there certainly would be.
And just a final bit of wagering news there too. Entain globally announced during the week that Stella David is their permanent CEO. Stella David has been in the role on a interim basis since Gavin Isaac's left the job in February. Gavin Isaac's only lasted 5 months. Before that, Stella David was interim CEO before that. So interesting time for Entain globally. There's actually had an earnings call the other day, which I've got to get a hold of from a global perspective to have a listen through. Obviously, yeah, plenty going on in that space as well. And yeah, the wagering industry continues to be in a state of flux within Australia. Thanks for joining us on Stroke Talk, brought to you by Darley and Inglis, our wonderful sponsors. Don't forget to give us a rating wherever you're listening to our podcast, be it on Apple, Spotify, Podbean, watching us on YouTube. God bless you. Appreciate to give us your rating, give us a comment, send us an email to editor@thestraight.com.au. Suggest any guests we may have. We might change things up a bit next week, Tim. We're not going to say who the guest is going to be yet, but I think we've got an interesting one for next week. Well, hopefully we can sort that out and get a bit of a change of pace. With a lot of bloodstock on this publication lately, which has been great. It'd be be interesting to get someone who's got a bit of a foot at a few different camps.
Well, he doesn't know that yet, but hopefully he agrees to come on.
Well, that's the plan. So let's get stuck in it. That's your job. That's your job, Tim. If we come back with another bloodstock figure next week, I'm sure they'll be entertaining and great. But Tim hasn't done his job. That's all I'm saying.
Good. Okay.
Thanks so much for your time, and we'll talk to you again next week.